Let me recognize the Honorable Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Minister of Finance and Corporate Governance and Public and Private Partnerships. The Honorable Henry Charles Fernandez, Minister of Tourism, Civil Aviation, Transportation and Investment. Dr. David Farrell, the Principal of CIMH, and other staff members of that institution, to include Mr. Adrian Trotman, Mr. Dale Destin, Director of the Antigua and Barbuda Meteorological Services, senior government officials, Mr. David Mongolon, Head of Corporation for the EU Delegation for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, other specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural National Climate Outlook Forum, the first for Antigua and Barbuda. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. I'm pleased to serve as your chairperson, Orvin Page, climatologist at the Antigua and Barbuda Meteorological Services. Usually we would have, as per protocol, our esteemed Prime Minister and Minister for our ministry, to include civil aviation and tourism, to come a little bit further down in the schedule of speakers, but our Prime Minister has other commitments, and so it is with great pleasure that I will now ask him to come and give some brief remarks. Would you welcome him, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Master of Ceremony. I acknowledge my colleague minister, the Honorable Charles Max Fernandez, the other members at the head table, esteemed ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. So let me apologize for my quick departure this morning. As indicated, I have at least two other engagements. One is a CARICOM engagement starting at 10, a CARICOM Zoom meeting, evidently a very important Zoom meeting. So it's not a case that I'm not prioritizing this meeting. In fact, my very presence is an indication of my full commitment and that of my government to continue to support the advancement of the Antigua and Barbuda Meteorological Service, to ensure that we enhance the services and at the same time to build capacity within the department, to upskill the staff, to acquire cutting-edge technology so that the ABMS could be easily one of the best, if not the best, meteorological service within the Caribbean region. And you'd recognize too, as a consequence of the existential threats of climate, that having a meteorological service that provides cross-cutting services across different sectors is absolutely important. In fact, I believe sometime in the future we'll look at the possibility of corporatizing the meteorological service so that they can monetize their services and become even self-sufficient. So we have great plans for this department. And again, as I said, my presence here is not only to support my colleague minister, but to signal to all that my government is absolutely committed to the continued advancement of the Meteorological Service Division. Well, I have a speech here that I'll try and deliver in the shortest possible time. And I don't expect this to be the featured speaker. The featured speech will be delivered by the minister. The National Climate Outlook Forum serves as a critical platform where stakeholders, including experts and policymakers, will gather to discuss climate forecasts, to share insights on climate impacts, and develop robust strategies to enhance our nation's climate resilience and preparedness. So this initiative, in which we are literally having the first meeting of the National Climate Outlook Forum, NCOF, is very important. Today, we embark on a journey to fortify our understanding of climate variability and its profound impacts and effects on our socioeconomic development. The theme of this year's forum, Enhancing Climate Resilience and Early Warning Systems, reflects our commitment to building a more resilient and prepared society in the face of increasing climate-related risk. This theme also complements the SIDS4 theme of charting the course toward resilient prosperity. Climate services are pivotal in informing decision-making across various sectors, including agriculture, water resources, disaster risk management, health, and energy, among others. Our ability to anticipate and respond to climate-related challenges hinges on the quality and accessibility of these services. The NCOF aligns with the Global Framework of Climate Services, the GFCS, by prioritizing these key sectors, ensuring that our climate information is both actionable and impactful. As we gather here, it is important to acknowledge our recent accomplishments. And allow me to introduce COSIS, that is the Commission of Small Island States on International Law and Climate. COSIS stands as an intergovernmental organization, and this commission was established on the margins of COP26 in Glasgow, in which Antigua and Barbuda and Tuvalu established this commission specifically to explore a legal pathway to address the issue of climate change. You'd recognize that during the last 30 years, there have been these conferences of the parties in which nations rich and poor, developed and developing, would have met to discuss climate issues, their impacts, and certainly solutions to the climate change problems. However, we observe that the interventions, for the most part, were inadequate, and that the pledges that were made, generally speaking, were not adequately satisfied. In fact, the developed countries were literally gaming the system. We had become hopeful that by 2015 in Paris, and as a result of the Paris Agreement, that would have seen a significant improvement thereafter in the climate ambitions of developed countries, and to include developing countries that are large polluters. Unfortunately, the COPs that followed after Paris did not result in any significant changes. So, for example, the pledge of $100 billion a year, that did not quite materialize. And many other offers were made, many other commitments were made, even to reduce emissions. And we found that in many instances, with the reduction in emissions that were promised, that many countries were going in the wrong direction, to the extent that we're now faced with a potential overshoot of the 1.5 degree threshold that was established. And we all know the consequences of exceeding that 1.5 degrees. We know that what will happen is that climate events will become more frequent. Storms, for example, will be not only more frequent but more ferocious. Sea level rise will continue to destroy our coastline, and certainly the ocean acidification as a result of the ocean sequestering carbon would result in more coral bleaching. So we took a decision that we could not depend exclusively on the voluntary actions of these large polluters, and that we had to seek a legal pathway to complement the negotiations or the diplomacy that would have taken place during the various COPs. So in 2021, literally during the heightened period of COVID, we had the tenacity, that is Antigua and Barbuda along with Tuvalu, to establish this commission, which is a formal commission lodged with the United Nations. And subsequently, we took a legal question to ITLAS, that is the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, that is responsible for UNCLOS, that's the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And the question that was put to them is whether or not carbon dioxide represents pollution, and if the states parties are violating their treaty obligations under UNCLOS. And you know that just about 2 weeks ago, we got a favorable decision confirming that these countries are definitely violating their treaty obligations, and that they have an obligation to protect, to prevent, and to preserve. That is, to protect the marine environment and to ensure that they do not pollute it. So we believe that that is an excellent decision which will help us with our future engagements. And as we go to the various COPs starting in Azerbaijan, we expect to be in a position to negotiate better terms and conditions, especially for small island states, as we seek to mobilize more funding for adaptation, for mitigation, and certainly for loss and damage. So we certainly welcome that decision, and you can be assured that that will be the first of many fights that we will undertake on behalf of small island states globally. In fact, if we are unable through negotiations, through diplomacy, to increase the amount of resources required to assist us to adapt and to mitigate, and certainly for loss and damage, then we'll be forced to take legal action. And we're prepared to do so if necessary. We hope that we would not necessarily have to pursue that pathway, but if it's necessary in order to protect our civilization, we'll be forced to do so. And what we're seeking here, in essence, is climate justice and also financial justice, because they would have decimated our respective countries, that is, the large polluters, over the centuries. And it is ironic that the very entities that would have destroyed our atmosphere, our planet, by virtue of the burning of fossil fuels, they're the same individuals who colonized us and literally plundered our people centuries ago. So whereas they plundered our forebears and they repatriated the profits to build out their societies, their cities, their universities, and also to fund the Industrial Revolution, they're the same people who would have polluted the planet and are now seeking to, not to be held accountable for their destruction of the planet. So I'll say here to all of us that we all have an obligation, each of us, to fight the climate injustice that has been perpetrated against us, and to do so stridently, not to be silent supporters of action against pollution, climate pollution, but for all of us to become activists, because in essence, we need an all-of-society approach in order to effectively get these large polluters to reduce their emissions and certainly to achieve that 1.5 threshold, which was established back in Paris, even though the Paris Agreement said no more than 2. Small island states were very firm in their position that there should be no exceeding of the 1.5 degree threshold. Now, the NCOF is not an isolated effort. It is intricately linked with global and regional frameworks, including the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. Our discussions today will contribute to the development of a national framework for climate services, ensuring that our climate action is coherent, inclusive, and forward-thinking. By aligning our efforts with these frameworks, we underscore our commitment to achieving global climate goals while addressing local needs. And I'm pleased to see, too, that we have a few other agencies here, departments, agriculture, Department of the Environment, because it's important that we address the issue of climate in a very integrated way. It is critical that there's proper coordination, cooperation, and collaboration going forward, because as we upscale and expand the services at the meteorological division, we will have to also employ specialists, including an agro-meteorologist, in order to ensure that we can have the type of data and support services so that we can achieve, let's say, greater production in satisfying that objective to become food secured. Moreover, this forum provides a timely opportunity to connect our national initiatives with the broader agenda of the SIDS conference. Small island developing state SIDS, like ours, are on the front line of climate change and obviously would have suffered disproportionately from the impact of climate. Through platforms like the NFOC or NCOF, we can amplify our voices, share experiences, and advocate for enhanced support and resources to build climate resilience. So again, I just want to say that it is critical, because if we're successful in adapting and mitigating, we have to attract more resources, and those resources will not come voluntarily. And I'm referring here to financial resources for loss and damage, and certainly for adaptation and mitigation. One of the areas in which we're seeking financial justice, which is complementary to climate justice, is that we have been pushing for the reform of the international financial architecture. So we are asking entities like the World Bank, the IMF, and certainly the multilateral banks to be more responsive to the needs of developing countries, especially SIDS, and to help SIDS, and I would say primarily countries like Antigua and Barbuda that are considered to be middle and high-income countries that ordinarily are precluded from finance and development, to ensure that they too have a seat at the table and that they too can benefit from low-interest loans over long maturity transformations. So, just like how developed countries can borrow on the stock market at probably 2-3% over a long-term period, and to issue their long-term bonds over 20, 30 years, 40 years, and that developing countries, poor developing countries, the LDCs, the LLDCs, that they can borrow at 1% over 30 years. Small island states like Antigua and Barbuda should also have that capacity to borrow on a long-term basis, and certainly at a low cost. So as it stands now, small island states like Antigua and Barbuda that are considered to be wealthy small island states are precluded. And you find, for example, that when we are faced with these climate crises and other crises, I mean, even during the COVID pandemic, we were precluded from accessing much needed finance for development. And you'd recognize that these crises are not as a result of any bad policy of our administration. They are literally exogenous shocks that would have undermined our development. So we have taken the position that we should be in a position, just like any other nation, to access cheap financing and to have the type of long-term maturity transformation so that we can reduce the payments and to create fiscal space. And we even continue to fight for, I'd say, debt write-offs, debt restructuring, overall debt relief, because a lot of the debts that we have in our books, which would have created a debt overhang, these debts were created from loans and advances that we had to incur in order to repair damaged infrastructure from repeated storms. So it's only fair that we are given some level of debt relief in order to address the injustices of the past. And I'll say here, it may not be easy, just like the issue of climate reparations, slavery reparations, that we've been fighting, and that the response has been relatively slow. I'm sure that there will be continued pushback, but we cannot afford to relent, and we have to continue to fight strenuously to ensure that the international financial institutions respond to our needs. And if we look critically at what would have happened during the last 30 years of these COPs, there's no doubt that we have made incremental gains. So for example, at the last COP in the UAE, we were instrumental in getting the Loss and Damage Fund established. Now at the next COP, our main challenge now is to get it fully funded and operationalized. Now, I have to admit too that Antigua and Barbuda has also been at the forefront of the fight to establish this Loss and Damage Fund. So again, nothing will come easy our way, but we must have the type of courage and resilience to continue to fight, not only for Antigua and Barbuda, but certainly for all small island states globally. And certainly the recently concluded SIDS would have resulted in an outcome document in which Antigua and Barbuda will be taking on the leadership for all SIDS globally. And we do recognize that it requires a significant amount of effort, intellectual capacity, strategies, and programs in order to ensure that we achieve the objectives of SIDS. And primarily the major issue here is to attract the necessary resources so that we will have enough funding to adapt, to mitigate, and certainly for loss and damage as these crises occur from time to time. But then again, our major objective, the most significant, is to push these countries to reduce their emissions, because ultimately, if there's an overshoot of the 1.5 and we have to contend with more devastating climate impacts, then we may not have a place to live. In fact, if it goes beyond damage of SIDS and other countries, we may not have a planet on which to live. So what we're doing here is certainly a global public good to continue to fight not only for the advancement of our people here in the Caribbean, but also to continue to fight in protection of global civilization. Now, the NCOF is structured around several priority sectors, as outlined by the GFCS, including agriculture and food security, water resources management, disaster risk reduction, health, and energy. By focusing on these areas, we aim to deliver tangible outcomes that will benefit our communities. The forum is built upon 5 key pillars, and I would not necessarily expand in the interest of time, I'm sure that others who speak will expand in them, but just to remind us all that the user interface platform, which will help to ensure better coordination and cooperation going forward and effective dissemination of climate information. That will be one of the critical areas going forward, especially for planning purposes, even within agriculture, the agriculture sector, for example. As you know, data is very important, and one of the outcomes of the SIDS conference is the establishment of a data hub. So we expect to work closely with the meteorological services to have adequate and timely data to assist with the planning, especially in certain sectors, to include agriculture. It includes climate services information system, observations and monitoring, research modeling and prediction. In fact, this is very critical, and I think too that we, as far as practicable, should have the capabilities to develop our own monitoring systems and predictions so that we don't have to rely exclusively from information, even external of the region. And obviously capacity building, as I spoke about, to upskill the staff and also to acquire necessary technologies and to ensure that we have a truly internationally recognizable climate services department. From this forum, we anticipate key outcomes, and these outcomes include enhanced early warning systems to ensure timely and effective communication of climate risk, informed decision making, of course, to improve access to climate data and services. I just spoke about that, and that having adequate and timely data is absolutely important for planning purposes. Increase resilience across priority sectors driven by integrated and informed climate action, and strengthening partnerships between government agencies, the private sector, academia, and civil society. So we're also pursuing a multi-stakeholder approach because clearly the public sector cannot do it on its own, and we want to make sure we have a completely integrated platform moving forward. Now, as we chart a course towards resilient prosperity, the Met services in all of our SIDS will mirror those of developed countries, and there's no reason why we can't. The key thing, though, is to be early adopters of cutting-edge technologies, including information technology. In recognition of this, I would like to take this opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to developing the Antigua and Barbuda Meteorological Service into a leading provider of climate and weather services in the Caribbean. Given the increasing likelihood of significant climate change impacts and the critical need for adaptation, our Met Service must be at the forefront of this effort. In support of this commitment, I am pleased to announce that the Cabinet has agreed in principle to create 12 new positions within the Antigua and Barbuda Meteorological Service. These positions will include an oceanographer, an agrometeorologist, an additional climatologist, a communication specialist, and a project management team, as well as a quality management team. And you know, before the function started, I would have said to my minister that between he and the leadership of the Met Service that they ought to increase the ambition, and certainly the Cabinet will support your increased ambition by providing necessary funding. Our goal is to develop an applied meteorological section that will provide next-level climate services for optimal decision-making and support. So certainly, again, we want to make sure that we have all of the expertise, and we're doing all we can. We'll go the extra mile to provide resources. And as I said earlier too, even the appointment of an agro-meteorologist, that is a very important position that we intend to fill as soon as possible, because as we recognize, practically all of our countries are food insecure, and we now have to pay more attention on our food security when you recognize or take into consideration the amount of conflicts that are taking place globally. It is not inconceivable that we could have significant disruptions to our food supply in the future. I mean, many of our countries, I'd say that between 50 to maybe 80% of the food that they consume is actually imported. And this risk can only be mitigated if we increase our food production. So it's important for us to continue to build capacity in various areas so that we can achieve increased food production and ultimately to ensure that we achieve some level of food security. And I'm not only talking the talk, but I'm walking the walk. So I don't know, those of you who are not aware, my name is Farmer Brown. your colleagues will give you the full details about Farmer Brown. We will also seek to pass the Met Service Bill, I would say at the earliest convenience. In fact, Minister and I will certainly push the Ministry of Legal Affairs to get that bill on the agenda for Parliament, certainly before the end of the year, well before the end of the year, to make sure that we have the supporting legal framework in place for the delivery of the various services. Further, we'll provide the resources and support to develop and implement necessary plans to chart the way forward and certainly the course of this organization. This commitment will position the Antigua-Barbuda Meteorological Service as a leader in the Caribbean in the provision of climate and weather services. Additionally, Antigua and Barbuda is one of 30 countries globally to be fast-tracked for early warning systems for an initiative under the United Nations. This initiative underscores the crucial role our Met Service plays in safeguarding our nation through advanced early warning systems and climate services. The AMBS NCOF or NCOF is supported by financing from the European Union under the Intra-ACP Climate Services and Related Applications CLIMSA program, the CLIMSA program, and in collaboration with the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, we are deeply grateful for the support which enables us to strengthen our climate resilience and early warning systems. And as I said before, we also, as a government, will be increasing our financing to the service to make sure that it becomes globally competitive. In conclusion, I'm confident that today's discussion will pave the way for a more resilient and climate-aware Antigua and Barbuda. And each of you certainly have an obligation to ensure that you educate those around you about the impact of the climate and the need for us to be all climate-responsible citizens. Your contributions and collaborations are vital as we navigate the complexities of climate change and work towards sustainable development. Thank you once again for your dedication and participation, and let us move forward with a shared vision and unwavering commitment to building a resilient and certainly prosperous future for all. Thank you.